Alrighty, there it goes. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Regenesis by CJ Cherryh. Um, Previously on, not a hell of a lot happened. I think the biggest event was Justin Warrick getting cajoled into calling Sandor Patil. Um, where are you? I'm sorry, I'm foggy today. I'm really, really, really foggy today. So I'm losing track of everything. Oh, right, the other thing was a dinner with Jordan Warrick. Not much gets learned from the call to Sandy Patil. Um, or was that the time before last? Oh, jeez. I'm completely losing it, guys. I'm so sorry. Yes, okay, he did. Um, Basically, okay, whatever. Anyway, listen to last time to know what happened last time, because my brain can't encompass the totality of it right now. Not a lot happens. The things that do happen are kind of re reaffirming patterns that have been happening already. Um, like Ari being a manipulator and trying to manipulate Jordan into doing what's better for him. Whether she succeeds or not is anybody's guess. Anyway, we're moving on to book 2 of Regenesis. The disadvantage occasionally of doing this live is that sometimes you catch me on a bad day where I am not a present. This is one of those days, apparently. Alrighty, let's get rolling. Hopefully I'll have a bit more. It's just been a long couple days. Alrighty. Let me slurp down some hydrating wonder fluid, and we'll get going. Book 2. Book 2, Section 1, Chapter 1. May 8, 2424. Gerard Nye and his companions were steadily putting on weight. At 12 weeks, having doubled in size in the last 7 days, Gerard massed 28 grams, somewhat less than a generous shot of the whiskey he'd one day love. He had gotten fists and fingerprints, and his general body shape was a little more human. He'd been drinking in the tank's biosynthetic amniotic fluid and routinely pissed it out again, proving his kidneys were starting to work, a process that would never stop in spite of his future abuses to his body until he did. Oh. Until he did. Stop, that is. Got it. He'd been drinking in the tank's biosynthetic amniotic fluid and routinely pissed it out again, proving his kidneys were starting to work, a process that would never stop in spite of his future abuses to his body until he did. His intestines were growing and began to fill his abdomen. His nerve cells were proliferating, synapses getting more organized. Oh, geez. Synapses getting organized enough to react to stimuli, but unaware at any higher level. The nerves had no myelin sheath as yet, and that limited their function considerably. Consciousness was nowhere in the picture. His cells all had other jobs to do, mostly that of dividing like mad, according to the map in their nuclei. If it said cooperate, they cooperated. If it said make skin, they made skin, in its varied layers and detail. If it said make nerves, they made more nerves. There was no higher authority. Book 2, Section 1, Chapter 2, May 5, 2424. The clothes that hung at the front of the closet, ready for wear, were appropriate for the house, not a construction site, and Ari delved deeper on her own quest. Let's try that again, because I don't understand what emphasis on the correct syllable is, apparently. Nice work! Frag said, make it confusing and bland. We'll get there. Probably 5 pages from the end, but we'll get there. We'll wake up eventually. May 5th, 2424. The clothes that hung at the front of the closet, ready for wear, were appropriate for the house, not a construction site, and Ari delved deeper on her own quest. She was going outside. On her own. She was ducking lessons today. She'd warned Justin she would. She hadn't forewarned anybody in Rezun-Sec, however, except Florian and Catelyn, hadn't sent word to Hicks, pointedly so. They hadn't yet gotten the new security team. They were still taking tape, but most of all, Justin and Grant were still reviewing files, and she didn't have to worry about trusting them yet, so she wouldn't. Just Florian and Catelyn, and a fast move that nobody would be expecting, well, except Sam Whiteley. It was still a scary venture, the first time to be really out in the open country. It was... I assume that must be relative. It was the very first time since they'd shot their way into Wing 1 that she'd really gone outside. Which has been months at this point. About 3 months, I think. The makeup was scant, and the clothes she'd picked out had once served for riding. When she'd been able to get to horse. Jesus. The makeup was scant, and the clothes she'd picked out had once served for riding, when she'd been able to get to horse. The weight she'd lost since Dennis died meant she could put her fingers in the waist of the once nicely fitting denims. The seat was a little less than fitted now, but Sam wouldn't care, out on the behind-the-building construction site, out under the cliffs that ringed Rezun. The sweater, at least, was meant to be loose. Comfortable, and part of her life when Dennis had been her protection, and Dennis had fussed over her and worried about her breaking her neck. She'd almost believed the old miser had cared, from time to time. On a day like this, she could almost believe something had just occasionally stirred in Dennis's wizened little heart. He'd say, if he were here, "Don't be a fool. Stay in." He'd really say something if he knew the information Florian and Catelyn were gathering up, and the net they were beginning to weave through the wing, and around people whose whereabouts they needed to know constantly. But today she was going out on her own, not because it was policy, but because it was her chance to do it, and she could do it, and she would do it. She was really going outside the safe bounds. A risk, and worth every minute of it. and she was going to scare hell out of Hicks's office, and probably Yanni was going to blow up and yell, but she was going to do it anyway, just flexing the constraints, just making sure what her freedom of movement was like. She'd make Regenesis twitch, and she'd do it again, and someday, on the day she chose, it wouldn't be a lark. It wasn't as if the new construction wasn't constantly available to Base 1 in virtuality. She'd seen the new wing grow day by day. But this, she'd decided, was the day. The whole site had, for the first month, been an ugly brown flat of disturbed earth, a swarm with bots 24/7, following their pre-programmed dig plan, tearing up the landscape and installing lines and conduits. A secret communion between them and the design specs, with rarely a human involved, except to watch it happen. Yanni had given his agreement. Yanni knew what it was, but if Yanni had kept his word... Nobody but Yanni knew, not even Regenesis. In the second month, human workers had moved in, installing, with robot assistance, a flat barrenness of ground forms, while still more bots scrambled this way and that on spider legs, measuring and installing connectors. Last week, the vertical forms had arrived from upriver, fresh from their use up at Strassenberg, and the site had It's missing an ly. Adverbs, the tool of a weak mind. I forget who told me that. That's like ancient history. That's like elementary or middle school English teacher. And I'm still not quite sure I understood what he meant. She meant? He meant. Anyway, back on task. Last week, the vertical forms had arrived from upriver, fresh from their use up at Strassenberg, and the site had suddenly risen up and up into a confusion of those huge prefabbed pore forms and their requisite braces, everything fitted together with a system of bolts and clamps into a configuration that had nothing to do with Strassenberg. The forms were capable of that. The main pour had been 3 days ago. This morning the forms had come down at the apex of the wing, and the featureless new walls stood clear and white in the camera view. Which was no longer enough for her satisfaction, or Sam's. She hadn't seen her friends in forever. She'd wanted to call Amy and Maddie out, but that was just too much noise. "Sirrah," Catelyn arrived in the bedroom, "Florian is on his way back with the runabout. We can meet him at the curb." "Excellent." Enthusiasm tingled through her. She escaped the bedroom, walked briskly, with Catelyn just in the lead, down the hall, through the living room to the front hall, and out the door to the general corridor. Escape, for sure. She'd dreamed initially, mere cloud castles, of taking Horse out of pasture, bringing him up to Wing 1 where he'd never been, and simply riding around the end of the building alone and unexpected. But the runabout Florian quickly suggested in Horse's stead was the practical thing, the safe thing, the thing that wouldn't bring Yanni storming down on Hicks, and Hicks down on the Venture midway with a flock of Regenesis agents. A car. That was fairly ordinary. Nobody would think a car was a break for a few hours' freedom. Downstairs, down another corridor, and toward the glass doors that led to the outside. Florian pulled the runabout into view at the curb just as they passed the inner glass doors of Wing 1. Door security in the section. Regenesis, caught by surprise, jumped to attention, properly opened the outer doors for them as they arrived, and one of the two guards, doubtless in communication with Florian, went outside quickly to open the passenger side doors of the runabout, probably thinking they were going down to the labs. Catelyn opted for the front seat, beside Florian. There was a heavy rifle waiting there, and she shifted it to sit down, burdened with her own armament. Ari, carrying not so much as a pocketbook, simply tucked up comfortably in the rear seat, and the instant she had settled and the doors had shut, Florian took off with a snap and an immediate jolt. Right over the curb near the flower bed and onto the lawn just beyond the building edge, a track not meant to be taken. Florian clearly enjoyed himself in taking them at breakneck speed down slope across the neat grass of the lawn and, by a sharp right, onto the construction road between Wing 1 and the river. The landscape bounced crazily. Ari grabbed onto the seat and laughed, wondering what Regenesis thought of the maneuver. But no one gave immediate chase. Catelyn talked to someone, answering questions, and Ari watched the moving scenery. Lazy brown river on the left, the robot-mowed grasses on the right, where the riverside lawn still remained sacrosanct from the passage of the big earth movers. Terran, that lawn. Nothing from Saiteen's native life got onto Rezune's territory, except what drifted ashore via the river, and that only touched the shore. And died. Such seeds and fragments of woolwood and other deadly things that somehow got past diversion gates in the river itself met a determined last line of defense down there. Dedicated robot sweepers zapped intrusion to cinder, sniffer pigs found anything that took root, and a cofferdam and a high-tech infiltration system kept the river water on one side and routed their own runoff back to their own use. All that effort prevented Terran life from getting out any more than they could help nowadays, and most of all, it kept low-level Sateen life from getting in. They passed the dim arc of the coffer dam in the river and swung around the long side of Wing 1. Now, point of question. I think most of the times I've ever seen the word cofferdam, I think I've seen it as one word. This has it as two, so if I stumble on it, that's why. In my brain, it's one word, but that doesn't mean that coffer space dam is wrong. That means in my brain, I'm right. As you will note, this is often objectively false. Where were we? Before I was denigrating myself, for some reason? They passed the dim arc of the coffer dam in the river and swung around the long side of Wing 1. Their course still ran well within the safe perimeter of the precip towers that sat up on the cliffs above their little valley and on matching cliffs across the wide Novaya Volga. There wasn't any real fear of a perimeter collapse in these days of triple redundancy in Rezune's atmospheric bubble, but the runabout, designed for the outback, with its 6 tires and a pressure seal on its doors, was nevertheless well equipped for that eventuality, with breathing tanks and emergency suits right under the seats. A small yellow sticker advised of that resource, should the sirens sound. Emergency supplies that might serve in the event of a backcountry wreck might be just a little redundant for an overset on the construction road, which was their most immediate peril. Florian took evident delight in crossing over the ruts of the big earth mover's tracks. Ari braced herself between seat and window and craned for a bouncing view as they swung another right turn around the far end of Wing 1, near her current apartment, which presented blind walls to the riverside. The newest part of the construction came into view through the front glass, walls still shrouded in forms. The new wing butted right up against the back wall of Wing 1. Eventually, there would be a subterranean access at that contact point, somewhere in that mess of gray pore forms. Right now, that connection with Wing 1 was a maze, a jigsaw of shapes and bolts and supports. And Wing 1 would be open for revision, renovation, after all the chaos since Dennis. There would be shops again, and restaurants, and maybe even a new Wing 1 lab, convenient for her use. Someday. Suddenly, with a veer over rough ground, new foam construction hove into view, off-white walls, brilliant and plain. The new wing as a whole formed a large 2-storied U, which would join not only Wing 1, but attach to admin on the other side, giving the new construction direct access all the way from Wing 1 to admin, and incidentally creating considerable interior space for roofed gardens. That last part was her idea. Why have a U and not take advantage of that inner space? Why confine all the flowers to the distant botany wing? They could bring them where people could enjoy them without a trek way down to the botany labs. Incorporate them into a roofed-over section of this wing. Or why not small nooks on all the wings in Rezune while they were at it? Economically extravagant, Yanni had called that notion, and nixed it, while letting her have her flowers in the new wing. But she thought increased productivity would pay for it over time, particularly when it increased the productivity of the best psych techs, operators, supervisors, and designers in the known universe, which was what Regenesis was. And she'd said so, and Yanni had said, "When it's on your watch." And that day, she'd decided, was coming. And that day, she'd decided, was coming. She had to think of it calmly, in terms of what she'd do once she could, and thanks to the sudden need to use Regenesis funds to keep projects working, all her plans had to be tempered with thoughts of how to pay for things. Yanni didn't wholly approve what she was doing. She'd put it down to the fact he was old way in so many areas, including his support of the First Ari's policies. If it was old, it was good enough until it fell apart. That was what she'd thought was a simple truth until she'd found out he had an agenda that needed a budget. A huge budget, cannibalizing hers. It was true. Even Yanni admitted Regenesis needed attention because there was a lot falling apart. Regenesis had started complete bare bones and in a hurry when humans first set up a permanent habitat down here. Regenesis had come first, even before Novgorod in any operational sense. So the buildings had all grown in the same white-walled, all-survival style of the early colony, right through her grandmother's time, and the First Ari's. Yanni's generation, previous generations, that architecture was what they knew, and it was getting old, hammered by the storms, and repainted and refoamed time after time to patch things. There had once been different ways of building. Elsewhere, Earth existed, as baroque as anyone could wish. Distant Pell Station was growing a forest inside its heart. So why shouldn't Regenesis have flowers? A sociological plus, flowers. Not one more huge population burst to factor in, dug in on an ice ball and getting less and less like Regenesis or Gehenna or the star stations. A chance to contemplate something fractal, something to take the tension off. Wasn't a stupid idea, even if it didn't make money in any visible way. Novgorod could use some parks, some gardens. It wasn't the frontier any longer. It was a place people lived, and they were getting changed sociologically by the walls and the dynamic of the buildings they'd been living in and how they fitted together. Gardens focused people into a different mode. And the inner gardens to go in this wing was altogether her design. The inner gardens, singular, sorry. And the inner garden to go in this wing was altogether her design. She'd sketched a plan or two for her someday castle, her place with flowers, even before Dennis had died. She'd talked about it with Sam Whiteley and Maddie Strassen and Amy Carnath in those days. Those days. As if it wasn't just last year. Just daydreaming, she'd called it. But on the day she knew she needed urgently to set up in newer, safer spaces, she'd called on Sam for what he knew. She'd entrusted the whole project to Sam, who was 18, the same as she was. Sam, backed by the resources and computer software of 2 major construction companies, and Sam's own gift of getting along with most everybody. He'd stood up for her through Yanni's misgivings, and then Yanni's assigning senior design to the project. Sam hadn't been off-put, and he'd doggedly stuck to their design. Sam was, depend on it, properly respectful of older engineers, but he'd run the designs through the computers himself, and she'd gotten her tall tower with the slanted walls that the older engineers said weren't cost-effective. He'd had the company architects, he'd assured Yanni, cross-check and criticize structural soundness with their specialized software. New materials said it would stand, safe and strong, and she'd personally bet the architects Sam consulted had found very little fault in what Sam put together. Regenesis Labs, their only recourse for the specialized kind of construction that provided systems, had provided some black box areas, just the dimensions and access requirements for electronics that would go in under senior admin's direction. Those were already in. Yanni had had technicians out here on that job before he'd left for Novgorod, all the while keeping the nature of the construction out of the public gossip. The virtuals didn't show up on regular vid channels, nobody saw what was going on back here, and it had been going on for months. Even while the tech designers were still fussing over the details, Sam, with her orders behind him, had had the earth movers running on the basic footprint. Starting with the basic Regenesis design had helped Sam speed things along, but at the top of the U was her design, Sam's design, inside that footprint. Maddie had gotten a word or two in about the interiors. Amy had contributed her usual cold water bath of cost and common sense, then finally thrown up her hands and said that if Yanni ever agreed to that much expense, she'd be very surprised. But Sam had gotten his budget, and his security class installers. Yanni had given him the go-ahead for just one spectacular variation on the old theme at the top of the U, her apartment. And then Yanni, maybe knowing she was going to be mad as hell about what he meant to do in Novgorod, and wanting to give her a toy to distract her, had approved it all and let the companies call in the resources. So their little club, their childhood clique, had found themselves building for real. Herself, Amy and Sam, Maddie, Florian and Catelyn, when they were kids, they'd gotten anywhere and been responsible for all sorts of mischief, outright sabotage of Dennis's intention to watch her, for starters. And sometimes they'd just done things for revenge, on a kid's scale, some of them pretty vile. And today? Today, Amy was admin, born and bred. It was Amy who'd had a good deal to do with cajoling Yanni. It was Amy who'd found justification in the figures she laid on Yanni's desk. Maddie ran an exclusive dress shop, and you'd never think she was worth anything in a construction project, but the dress shop was a front. Maddie collected gossip. She knew the female elite of Regenesis, knew their tastes, their habits, their liaisons, and their figure flaws. And besides that, Maddie had an eye for decor and design, and understood the use of the gossip she collected. You wanted something out of someone, you wanted a favor, the name of a contact? Maddie had the key. And Sam, well, Sam built things. Bigger and bigger things were in the future she planned. So their juvenile fantasy would come true. They'd be together again, here in this wing, when this place they'd all planned was done. Not for the reason they'd all planned, never thinking it was for their safety, just one grand continuation of what they'd dreamed of building for the sheer beauty of it. When they came in, they'd bring their liaisons, their families, their staffs, everything they needed. And damn it, she'd keep them safe, forever safe, everyone she wanted to protect and not have vulnerable to plots and gossiping schemes and outright sabotage once she took the reins. The centrists and the Paxers and the abolitionists wouldn't get to the people she loved. The first Ari, that Ari hadn't had personal weak spots. She'd kept very much alone through her life. Ari Sr. hadn't trusted anyone but her Florian and her Catelyn. But she'd learned how to use allies the way her predecessor never had. She'd confounded Dennis, frustrated Dennis, finally gotten the better of Dennis. Now she knew the better of Yanni. Now she had the better of Yanni and Hicks and Now she had the better of Yanni and Hicks of Regenesis, who actually knew what this place really was. Inside or outside this new wing for Yanni? That all depended. Maybe. Maybe not, depending on how Yanni took it, and how Hicks did, and what this team he was sending her turned out to be. "Come see," Sam's message yesterday had said. "We'd love it if you could come." So here they were, driving along beside the white walls, and the whole project becoming more and more real the closer they got, right down to the feathery pour marks on the new walls, where they'd freed the finished wall from the molds. All the conduits had gone into the forms before the pour, so she'd learned. The new place had a new sensor system, a new computer installation from the basic wiring up. It had new walls without 10,000 ghostly little lucifilaments. Lucifilaments, yes, that's what it says. It's just got a weird line break. It had new walls without 10,000 ghosty little lucifilaments running in places that were a real archaeological problem to trace, making a security headache for Wing 1 and most everywhere in Regenesis. Systems as arcane as Base 1, which had lurked within the lab computers until the day, event-driven, calendar-driven, it was never clear, it assembled itself and made contact, just could not surprise her in the new wing. Base 1 itself would get in, intact, through a prescribed gateway, and settle itself in, while other bases would have to stop at that gateway and announce their presence to Base 1 before touching system inside. She trusted Base 1, absolutely. She was pretty sure it would do what she asked it to do. She no longer trusted, however, the systems where she lived. She hadn't, from before Dennis died. Florian and Catelyn had long worried there might be a worm in the works where Dennis and his people had done all the arranging for years. Gerard might certainly have done things within Regenesis systems that could spring on them without warning. They'd gotten through the first months post-Dennis without disaster, but who knew what event might trigger something untoward? Gerard's rebirth? Dennis's re-beginning? Her own claim on power, when she did make it? Yeah, that's a okay, I see. The narrative is asking a question. Her own claim on power, when she did make it? She wanted to be in here when she made her move. Safe, isolated, in control. Yanni ran Base 2 at the moment. Nobody but an Ari Emery and those she permitted had ever run Base 1. But Base 2 had been in Dennis's hands before that, and having some buried section of Base 2 wake up and start actively spying, if Yanni didn't already run those functions, that wouldn't be good, no. They would be in their new, secure apartment before summer ended. Sam promised it, and she had every confidence that would happen on schedule. And the building had taken a big stride this morning. The gray, confusing forms that had stood at the end of the U had given way to a section of white, angled plains rising stark and beautiful against the sheer natural rock on the cliffs. Of the cliffs. Florian turned the little car into the rutted and dusty area of what a sign proclaimed as Parking A, among the giant earth movers, and Sam was waiting for them there, wearing a hard hat and orange overalls, no different from any of the Azzi who worked with him. Sam's square face split with a grin as they got out and walked onto the hard, rutted surface that was his particular domain. "I hope the poor would finally draw you out here," Sam said, waving an expansive gesture at the walls. "There you are, people! Home sweet home!" "Oh, there you are, people! Home sweet home!" It was different than anything ever built at Regenesis, an extravagant 3-story crown at the apex of the newborn Alpha Wing. Her heart beat faster in excitement. "We'll be done ahead of schedule," Sam said. "No bubbles in the pour. Went like a dream." That was good to hear. Bubbles in a foam wall were definitely a bad thing, and Sam meant they'd gotten all this foam work set and hardened without sawing areas out, setting up forms again, and foaming in twice, and no problems with the design. Sam was decidedly happy with his job. But she wanted to see. She wanted to walk inside and make it real, not just a virtual image she could get on the computer. "Can we get in there?" she asked. "Right this way." Sam led them all toward a gap in the pour, a broad area with rough, notched edges. "This is just a workman's door. You won't be able to walk through this wall when you live here. We'll foam it so it's just wall, ever after." Regenesis was like a fortress of sorts, against environmental hazards as much as for any other reason. The only lookout on this exterior side of the building, once it was finished, would be cameras, no doors or openings of any kind. Her apartment, at the top of the U, jutted out farthest toward the wild and the cliffs, and farthest upward, in its reinforced light channels. The rest of the U's ground floor would be offices, a few shops, while the upstairs was all going to be very restricted residences. Her apartment would have its main door on the 3rd floor, the way things were in Wing 1's 2nd floor. But unlike Wing 1's, her apartment and only her apartment would have an upstairs section above the 3rd floor. That was the height of the... Where's the height? That's... Okay, so there's an M dash. Oh, okay. But, unlike Wing 1's, her apartment and only her apartment would have an upstairs section above the third floor. That was the height of the crown, up among the angles of the walls. That would be her room, her office, her personal safe space, with Florian and Catelyn by her, and their rooms, and all the things they needed, up above the world, almost even with the cliffs. Right now, the word given out among the CIT workers was that all this construction was new labs. By the time rumor got out that it was going to be a restricted residential area, and hers in particular, the security installations would all be in, and that time was getting very close. By the time Alpha Wing system went online, and perished immediately as Base 1 moved in and took over, well, it wouldn't matter any longer at that point, what anyone knew. They'd be defended. Everyone she loved would be defended once system came up and Base 1 ruled Alpha Wing. Sam led the way inside, over dusty concrete floors littered with foam construction crumbles and plaster spatters. Sunlight fell in unlikely rectangles and bars from somewhere above, where not all the construction was finished, Ari supposed. Where they walked, first floor, was going to be offices and residences for Wing security personnel other than her personal bodyguard, and they all would have immaculate security clearance. Her new apartment, over their heads at the moment, would more than protect her. It would innovate. It would be all angles and surprises like light and living things. It would inspire her and inspire her visitors with things that had never existed in Rezun. Dennis's old apartment, where she had grown up, was a boxy put-together of the ubiquitous Rezun cream-colored walls and recessed lights, just boring, 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 with the same color walls in every room. Oh, it had real imported wood, yes, and all sorts of luxuries like hand-knotted carpet and bric-a-brac and china. She'd sent the whole lot to storage so that Dennis, too, if he one day existed, could have it all intact when he grew up. But... God, that some mentor had to teach a little boy that stuffy decor. And Ari Sr.'s apartment, where she lived now, had luxury, a lot of it, and it had its graces, but it was all linear, archway into archway, brown travertine and polished floors that would skid with you if you didn't watch the rugs, and it had sat vacant for nearly a decade and a half with Base 1 gone dormant, an interregnum in which someone very, very clever and skilled, like Aban, like Seeley, could have gotten into the place or at the place in some clever way that they had never detected, with things as small as a human hair. Illicit surveillance might not have waked up yet, because Yanni might not have full use of Base 2, which might have plunged into partial dormancy itself, awaiting some event to bring it live. Some event, like a young Aban logging onto system. That wasn't going to disturb her life. Not in Alpha Wing. "This way," Sam said, and they followed Sam onto a construction lift. It lurched into action and lifted them up and up and... It lurched into action and lifted them up and up a narrow, dim shaft to the highest level of the building. "This is your front door," Sam said, lifting the safety bar to let them out, and waving them toward a single gap in the white, angled walls around them. Light beyond that door was getting in from somewhere up here. It had to be her design, her sun shaft somewhere aloft, bouncing light from panel to panel. Her apartment, this apartment, was going to be a lot of glass and lights and living things. Her home was going to have fish, a whole wall that was a real tank, not just a projection of virtual fish. They were going to get them all the way from Earth's tropics. Well, via the public aquarium at Pel, which was shipping them to Cytine, which would immediately ship them down to her. So when you sat in the living room, there would be that living wall to watch on one side, and when you were in the entry hall, there was going to be a waterfall with real rock going down to a stone floor, with a clever trick, an air wall, Sam's idea, to prevent the spray from getting beyond the rim of the pool. And upstairs in her office, which was going to be right next to her bedroom, there would be living plants behind glass. She'd wanted real birds. She'd had to reconsider that because anything you imported down to the planet that was ever capable of reproducing had to be clean, with a natural barrier between it and freedom on Cytine, and had to be considered for the ecology they'd started to restore. The water and the sea were already a mess, that was one thing, and for another, if the tanks ever breached, the fish couldn't walk across the lawn to get to the river, so they were all right. So no birds, just fish. But she could do real science with what she kept. She could do so many things. She could breed fish and get them to a public aquarium in Novgorod where people could come and enjoy them, and know something about Earth in the process, and something about living next to an ocean. And instantly, as they walked beyond the second wall just short of where the security installation would be, she recognized the recess for the water pool, just the way she'd drawn it, and saw the sunlight. What did I do? And saw the straight, bare form for the rock, slanting away and up on the left. Everything was white and dusty from the pour, but a glance all the way up showed a series of white planes, and the sun shafts and pressurized windows she'd asked for must already be in here, too. Real daylight came into the area. There was a balcony above that overlooked it all. There were recesses here and there for the electric lighting that would brighten with a vocal command once system was in. Beyond, in the open-plan dining room, was the section of arched roof for the projection that would show the real sky, just the way it was outside. So when it rained, it would cloud over, and when it was night, there would be stars. She wanted all the contact with the planet she could possibly get, living under the umbrella of the weather makers and precip towers as they did, and being forbidden windows that really looked out on the world. It would feel open. If it worked, they were going to do the same sky dome in the big hall of the general public residencies. She was going to fix Regenesis. It was going to be a place people wanted to be, before she was done with it. It wouldn't be the same old utilitarian box shape and domes, not after her. It was all Sam again. Sam had taken her rough sketches of years and years ago and played with them in his own computer for years. Sam had lately run it all through the big computers and ended up with real measurements that were going to meet regulations and make design sense. And Sam said he was working with architects who were with him and excited about what he was doing. She'd pulled strings with Yanni to get Sam time on systems at night, and Sam had pulled shift and shift. Maybe it's supposed to be shift after shift? Give him shapes and he could figure the real building down to the joins and conduits. Give him charge of the logistics, and he had a fine grasp of what had to be scheduled when, right down to dealing with the bot programmers and giving clear orders to the ASI workers and the CITs. More, Regenesis Construction wanted him when he was done. They told him he was already official on staff, never mind the regs and his lack of a degree and his age. He'd done his time in tape study that hadn't been recorded, but they wanted him. The head of architectural design in RC, the same architect she'd aimed at Strassenburg itself, she'd hired to do the job here, too, and asked him to mentor Sam. But within the first month, RC's chief architect had just de facto turned Sam and two of his best people loose to handle everything on site here while he concentrated on the more esoteric technicalities of the precip towers at Strassenburg. Fitzpatrick was the man's name. Florian and Catelyn had investigated him top to bottom, the only CIT besides Yanni to be trusted with the knowledge of what was going on here. He was actually an uncle of Amy's, and the relationship between Fitzpatrick and Sam was absolutely the happiest of all the string-pulling she'd ever done. And here was the result of it. The planes of the walls evolved into one another as they all walked through. "That's my fish wall!" she exclaimed, spotting the deep recess, delighted, and Sam beamed and blushed a bit. "The glasses here, that was big. The build for the tank will be among the last. I'll be looking to expert specs on that." "I've got the data you want," she said. She was seeing a tank filled with water, where now there was only white. "I want to learn it myself, but I'm going to be contracting a specialist in salt aquaculture to actually do the running long term. He'll help you set it up. His name's Chris BCN-3. He was supposed to be on the beta station production tanks. He's 17, still taking tape, but he's getting info on Earth exotics, and he's through enough... Let's try that again. He was supposed to be on the beta station production tanks. He's 17, still taking tape, but he's getting info on Earth exotics, and he's through enough already to help you. This week, if you need him. He's going to be supering all the watery technicals, and with a couple of assistants if he turns out to need them. Wouldn't hurt at all. I'm anxious to get the pumps arranged. Any of your other staff you'll want to tour through or consult during the build, you let me know. The kitchens might be an issue. Florian and Catelyn are on it. They'll get you a list of people we might have come here to walk around at certain stages. Security, operations, kitchen in particular. We're getting staff. They aren't cleared into the house yet. A few here might be helpful, Florian said, behind them. Not many, though. We won't inundate you with advice. A laser must be running. A burned stench wafted through. Something metal fell, distant, and the impact of something the size of the runabout echoed off the walls. Sam tapped his hard hat. Must have dropped a wrench out there. This area's safe. Down the main corridor, they're doing some light work in the ceiling today. The supers are all on our list, Catelyn said. It was a question regarding the CITs on site. Always, Sam said, unruffled. Security never lapses. They don't even take an inside lunch break. The Aussie crew is deep set against discussing their work off duty, so damned enthusiastic I have to make them take breaks. They all know what they're doing is unique, and they're excited. So are the rest of us, to tell the truth. Want to see the latest? He walked them to a serpentine line marked on the floor, which ran to the edge of the living room. I want to S-curve a meter-deep channel through the flooring. A water channel, clear top, lighted underneath, with rock. I love it! Ari exclaimed. A river. Well, a stream. It'll share its water source with the waterfall, not the tank. Fresh water. Complete loop. There's a submersible pig to keep it. There's a submersible pig to clean it and zap the algae. Pig? She envisioned the ones that sniffed native life that got onto the grounds. Sam's eyes danced. They were brown, unpretentious as the rest of him. He so loved knowing something technical that she didn't. A machine pig. A cleaner bot. Same as they use for regular water systems. Standard piece of equipment, actually. That's what they call it. You ought to work. Pig. She liked that word. It conjured the working pigs that patrolled the grounds and kept them safe. Do it, if you think it'll work. I like your river, Sam. I love it. It just came to me when I was walking through here. We can have a pump at the top of the loop, right where the waterfall is, to keep the water really moving. Oh, don't tell me everything. I just want to be astonished when I see it. They toured the downstairs bathroom, a modern installation that played a little off the waterfall concept with sealed stone, but the fixtures were all modern. And there was a second scissor lift to take them up to the second floor, a scary little step across vacant space and onto solid foamcrete. At one end of that hall, beside the as-yet railless balcony, was Florian and Catelyn's suite, which was going to have a gym, and a workshop, and a library of its own. Other staff quarters would be right below it. Much more convenient, was Florian's only comment. But their eyes were bright. They were happy and easy with Sam. They always had been. And then her room, her huge bedroom, with a cozy nook for a bed, and a living sky ceiling, and a glassed-in area for the divider from her office, where her terrarium would be, and her wardrobe, and her bath, which had an in-floor tub, and a mister, and its own little salon, plus a little exercise room of her own. It was everything, all in one. It was all her imagination wrapped up in a design of white plaster at the moment, and she went out onto the... I don't know why I lilted like that. That was a very strange way to do that, considering of the way the comma and the rest of the sentence goes. Where were we? Oh, right. It was all her imagination wrapped up in a design of white plaster at the moment, and she went out onto the unrailed balcony. Florian and Catelyn were there in a heartbeat, but not too far toward the edge, just looking down at all of the living and dining area below. she might have to take over Regenesis early. She might not have the years she wanted. But she was going to have all her friends, all the people she most wanted. Yanni, too, if she could answer the questions she had. She'd been pent in, feeling like a prisoner in the slow ruin of Wing 1. When they finished this, they could start repairs, where the search for bugs had literally ripped walls out. Repairs much, much beyond a fresh coat of plaster. Maybe it was dangerous to think of directing Regenesis and still hoping to be as happy as she wanted to be in this castle in the air. But this place was all light and optimism. It cost. But it was where she could keep safe what her existence threatened, make an iron-hard core that wouldn't be vulnerable to threat. Maybe it was the stupidest, most dangerous thing in the world to surround herself with the people she was fondest of. The first Ari would have warned her that it was setting herself up to get them killed, or to get herself hurt. Weak is dead. The first Ari had said that, too. And the first Ari hadn't had anybody that she was that fond of, except Florian, except Catelyn. The first Ari had told her her own nightmares of guilt, the discovery she'd enjoyed inflicting pain, and yet did it, when she did it, purely for a reason. The first Ari had warned her, as best she rationally knew how, that the path she was on went further and further into solitude, and into the dark. She'd had hormones shot into her deliberately to make her mad and had mean things done to make her miserable, all because she was supposed to live the first Ari's life, the way Ari's life, under her own mother, had been one long lab test, intimately recorded, and full of Ari's mother's orders. It was just everything, every cruel thing justified for the project, until Dennis died and the project stood on her own 2 feet. Well, she was on her own 2 feet, with her own walls rising around her. And she'd always been smart. All it took for her to learn something was for her to get her head in the right mode, and she'd been quick enough to take in what they wanted. Once they'd gotten her scattershot mind both mad and focused, because mad was always part of it. She could still be the genius her gene set could make her without her being as cold as the first Ari, couldn't she? Controlling the mad was the important thing. It was what this place was for. She could love people. Now that she knew the whole scheme, she could try to set things right. Yanni would be here. Most of what Yanni wanted was to get back to his work, his real work. He didn't ever want to run Regenesis. He didn't really want to fight her for his big project out on the fringe of space. He'd understand if she just got his hands off the controls and gave him back his labs. Sam would live here in the wing. Sam, the one... Sam would live here in the wing. Sam, the one in their group who'd just been so reliable, so sensible in their growing up, that if Sam hadn't existed, they might have all gone at each other's throats and nothing would ever have worked. Though, when he got through with her wing, Fitzpatrick wanted him up at Strassenburg, which was a big thing for Sam, the height of his childhood ambitions. It would be hard to have him gone that long, but Sam would be her eyes and ears on that site. Sam and the high-level security team Florian and Catelyn would pick out to keep him safe. So Sam's apartment would be vacant for a while, maybe a couple of years. Maddie and Amy, at least, would be living in the wing with her, right from the start. And when Sam got back from Strassenburg, all the old gang would be here, all of them. She was going to have Justin, too, though he was twice their age. She had a place for him and Grant, a beautiful apartment where nobody would ever threaten him again. There'd been her playmate, Valerie. In her mind, he was still a little boy with a mop of dark hair. He was out at Fraggoth, like Ollie. Early on, she'd sent a letter, inviting them all back this summer, all the exiles, when Alpha Wing was finished. It took 6 months to get an answer, but she had... It took 6 months to get an answer, but she had started it, on the last day she'd held absolute control of Regenesis, before she turned the directorship over to Yanni. She couldn't get Maman back, but Maman's companion, Ollie, was still alive. He'd had the CIT tape, and he'd become director out there. She'd asked Ollie to come home too, but she'd added, as she hadn't in Valerie's letter, "Only if you want to. There's a place for you here, but if you're happy there, then stay. I remember you and Mama every day. But if you do what you most feel you should do for Mom. But you do what you feel you... But you do what you most feel you should do for Mama's sake." He was Azzy, or he had been, and nothing could shake him from that loyalty and have him be happy, and she knew that. There was Julia and Gloria Strassen, who never had liked her when she was little, but she could patch that up. She'd been a baby when Dennis had sent them away. She could set some of Dennis's injustices right, and she could use the power she had to protect what her existence jeopardized. It was scary to think how dead set the first Ari had been against trusting people. "The ones you trust most," the first Ari had said, "watch most." And the ones who'd had their lives torn apart because she was born, they were dangerous because they had a real reason to be mad at her. But she could try to fix it. And the first Ari hadn't lived in a prison, not half so much as she did. The first Ari had been absolutely free to run around the halls and go where she wanted and do what she wanted. The first Ari hadn't been afraid of anything. But everybody but Gerard had hated that Ari. She'd begun to realize that, and it was a hard truth to live with. She was different than that Ari. Some people hated her, but a lot of people loved her. And a lot more people knew they needed her. They'd all protected her so much, so devotedly, they'd made her afraid of people. Most of all, afraid of people. And that made her mad. And mad always made her think. And she wasn't like Yanni's beetle, a creature in a bottle, forever going in the same circle, forever the same Ari. "So sober, Ari," Sam said. "Thinking," she said, and then thought that she'd used too harsh a tone, too much out of the dark depths of her heart. She set a hand on his shoulder and walked back to safety, Florian and Catelyn attending. Sam led them all back to the scissor lift, the someday lift shaft, and sent it back down into what would be the central hallway of the whole project. Right where Sam's river would... Central hallway of the whole complex. Sorry, I don't know how I got project out of that. Quick casual reminder, let your eyes and visual cortex lie to you. "Thinking," she said. Oh wait, we were after that. Sam led them all back to the scissor lift, the someday lift shaft, and sent it back down into what would be the central hallway of the whole complex, right where Sam's river would run. "So?" Sam asked. "Perfect. It's just perfect." He grinned then. Sam was happy. That was all it took. And Sam's pleasure lightened her heart. It always did. "So," he said, "do you want to pick out colors?" "Blue," she said. "A blue couch, just so it's comfortable." "Cooler white walls, then, for blue." "Violet and cool white walls. Maybe some quiet blue-greens, pastel stuff. I want color." "That should be pretty," he said. "Should be real pretty. Are you moving any of her stuff in?" She gave a little twitch of her shoulders, a thoughtless flinch. There was what she lived with. There was what she lived with. There was some in storage. Historic. Some really nice pieces, imports from Earth. Human history. But human history had started over again on Cytine. In cities founded, like Novgorod, mostly by Azzy, and going on into generations of freedmen. What did old Earth mean to them? What could it mean? Human history this lot of humans hadn't replicated, had largely forgotten. She didn't have as many blank walls in the new place, not as much room for paintings and sculptures. And ought she to take those old paintings off her walls and lend them to a museum, or to the university down in Novgorod, and let people study them for what they were, and try to figure out what it meant to lay paint on canvas, instead of commands into a computer? Maybe the old things were important things to know. Maybe somebody should learn how to do it again. "You're thinking again," Sam said. "Is something the matter?" No, she said, and laughed, and laid a hand on Sam's shoulder. No, I was just wondering whether we ought to teach Azzy to paint. To paint? Sam laughed. Pictures. To paint pictures like the old paintings. I think it might be good for them. Maybe it's good for people. And I think maybe I ought to let some of those paintings out and see what they think. They are pretty, Sam said. I always admired them. They're pretty. They're alien as they can be. I can't imagine trees that thick. That's just strange. I think people would be looking at that, the green color, and not at the paint. I think you're actually supposed to, Sam said then. You're supposed to believe in them and not the paint. That's a point. What did you say about my little river? I want to be amazed. I think the paintings are like that. He never ceased to surprise her. So what do you think? Should I get into storage? Bring them out? He nodded. I've seen them. Some aren't that pretty. Some are spooky. But you feel something when you look at them. Maybe I should look at more of them, she said, and found she'd gathered her arms around herself as if she'd met a chill in the air. It wasn't just paintings. It was the first Ari's mind. It was the images the first Ari had seen, lived with, picked out to surround herself with, out of everything she could have had. What even the first Ari might have flinched at and hidden away. And instead of building, the first Ari had surrounded herself with things out of old Earth. Priceless things. Spooky things. Things that weren't Cytine. Trust Sam to have looked at them when he was about to build this place. With a heart that had no guilt, no preconceptions, he'd looked at them, when probing that deep into the first Ari's stored artwork was something she'd zealously avoided. She hadn't wanted to meet them. Hadn't wanted to be surrounded by the first Ari's mind, swallowed up, drowned in the first Ari's acquisitions. She wanted some of her own. But you felt something, Sam said. And Sam was always in favor of feeling things. Hang them all, she said suddenly. Hang the ones you like wherever you think they ought to be, in my apartment, in the corridors where people walk. Hey, I'm the builder, not the decorator. You know them, though. You've seen them. Hang the really spooky ones in the guest apartments. He laughed. Wicked, Ari. She laughed, too. Laughing took the haunt out of her predecessor's furnishings and made her think, maybe I ought to use more of them. I'm saving Dennis's stuff and Gerard's to bend their successor's brains into the old mold. Maybe, it was a sobering thought, maybe I should meet her, finally. She's the voice of Base 1. I've always trusted her voice. So what's to be afraid of in seeing what she saw, what she troubled to bring here out of old Earth? About the furniture, Sam, her stuff. Don't strip her old apartment, the one I'm in. We'll just lock it up, leave it as it was, just like Gerard's, just like Dennis's, with all the pictures that hang there. In case they didn't replicate her, but the first Ari, but she didn't say that to Sam. But with what's in storage, if you can use it, never mind my colors, do it. Her taste was a lot of brown and green. That was true. Along with occasional greens and golds in the paintings, alien greens, yellowy earth greens like the lawn outside, like the plants in the vivarium, when every green growing thing native to the planet was tinged with blue and gray, and the ground was red. Maybe I should do green and brown in this room, her green, water green, old earth brown. Oh, just make it fit, Sam. I told you, I'm no decorator. I'm really not. But you knew how to look at the paintings in the warehouse. You'll know what to do with them. Surprise me. That's too many surprises, Ari. No such thing, she said suddenly, and remembered the first Ari saying out of Base 1. There are people who aren't surprised because they don't notice what's surprising in this world, and they just never wonder. And there are, much rarer, people who aren't surprised because they always see what's coming. When you're a child, you're surprised by most things. It gets rarer as the years pass. Surprises keep us sane. They set us into new territory. They give us something to think about when the same old things have been the rule. You can go to sleep for years with the same old things. Sleep and eat away at your life. Sleep can eat away at your life, and sleep can be dangerous. Not always good things, but maybe maybe it was good for her to meet some things she hadn't planned. And paint was cheap, until it made a 1,000-year-old painting.
No such thing, Sam. You're king of surprises. You do it all. You pick.
You're going to hate it.
I've never hated anything you've ever done. Don't hold back. Give me the best place you can with whatever of her stuff fits, and bring all the hidden stuff out where people can see it.
All right, Sam said, and together they walked out of her apartment and on down the corridor, past scaffolding and into the vicinity of a good deal of cutting and banging, and past doors that would belong to people she'd grown up with, and then downstairs by yet another scissor lift. There was space for shops besides the security quarters and wing admin, little hole-in-the-wall shops where she and all the people who had a right to be there, and their staffs, could do something she didn't ever get to do in the tight security Rezun had now, and just go shopping. Well, at least they could order something to be in one of these shops and go down and look at it before they bought it off catalog. That was almost like shopping. Oh boy. I wonder what Thesari would think of Amazon. Not the rainforest. No, we're losing that one pretty quick. Well, I almost don't care. Get banished to the nether zone. Boom. Sorry. Twitch viewer bot thing. I always extirpate those. There'd be a nice little snack shop and breakfast place, which would turn into a nice evening restaurant. It would cater, too, with special attention to security. That was all planned. There'd be a men's shop for Yanni and Frank, and Justin and Grant, and Sam and Pavel, when they got back from Strassenburg, and Amy's Quentin, what time Quentin wasn't, like Florian and Catelyn, in uniform. And there'd be a few conference and gathering rooms for anybody that needed them. They could use one of those conference rooms for displays. For art, she thought suddenly.
We can have a museum in Alpha Wing, she decided. We can have our own museum. A little one for some of the paintings. We can have another over in the admin wing, where they'll be safe. I think that's a good thing. Sam, you can do it.
A museum?
The first Ari knew people who'd seen the world built. They're all dead now. We're the first generation that doesn't know anything about Cytene before there were people here. And all their things, if they aren't in archive, are just going away, thrown into the cycler. A virtual museum's a good thing. You can look that up any time you want, but you have to ask for the displays. And you have to know to ask. You need to know what you're looking for in the first place to look something up, and that necessarily slants it, doesn't it?
Slants it, too, Sam said. If somebody picks out what you'll see.
Someone's always picking for us. But the people who painted those paintings did their own picking about what to paint. You can see the virtuals. You can get any repro you want, if you want to put your hands on it. But if you want to get surprises that you didn't ask to be face-to-face with, maybe that's the idea. You're right. Maybe I should look at what I don't expect. It's why I decided I want the first Ari's stuff. Maybe it ought to be like that for other people. They need to be surprised. And we need to haul some of the stuff out of the warehouses before it goes into the cyclers and just have it for people to look at. We're the generation that doesn't remember the beginning. Maybe we need to look hard. Sam stopped still and looked at her a long moment. Sometimes you don't make thorough sense, but you always seem like you do. She laughed. Not many people would tell her she babbled. She knew she did. She saw things in her head, saw things she didn't have vocabulary for. The first Ari, people said, had been very spare with words. The first Ari had ideas in her head, too, which didn't have words. The first Ari didn't habitually let those things out. She, on the other hand, tried to talk to the people she thought would understand. And she babbled thorough nonsense, and amused Sam. "You see through me," she said to Sam. "I try to see into your head," Sam said. "You're awake all the time, you know that. You're the most incredibly awake person I know. You want a museum in admin. Sure, you get Yanni Schwartz to agree and give me space, and I'll figure out how to do it. I have to go the slow way and look up things like a regular guy, but you'll get your museums.
You'll get your museum.
I'm not about museums, she said. I'm not supposed to be, at any rate. It's just a side thought. I have to do so many other things. God, Sam, I'm studying. I'm studying all day long. I'm learning the things I'm supposed to, psych and design and genetics, and I spend so long at deep study I'm starting to go into deep state without the damn pills, sometimes so I don't even know I'm doing it. But when I have thoughts that aren't on topic, I have to shed them. I just have to turn them loose and shed them or go crazy, because I haven't got time to do them, and my museum is a thought like that. I had it. I want to get rid of it, but I don't want to lose it, and I'm going to be busy, so you do it, Sam.
Ari. He reached out and gripped her shoulders, a contact Florian and Catelyn would allow very few people, and kissed her on the forehead. Take a break, Ari. Take a day off, and take a break. She sighed, rested her hands on his arms, looked him closely in the eyes.
You're a genius, you know it. You really are.
That's a laugh. He dropped the contact. That's the last thing I am.
I know it when I see it. You are. Always were. Sam, take care of yourself. I mean that.
Is there any special reason you should say that?
Selfishness. I need you. I'll always need you. I'll think of you when I'm studying that wretched population equation till my eyes cross.
Second kiss, this one on the cheek. Like a brother, if she'd been born with one. She'd never had sex with Sam. Never would. That wasn't the way they were with each other.
You just take care of yourself.
You just take care of yourself, Ari. Hear me? You're going too hard again. What's new about that? She was so tired she felt tears start in her eyes, but she wouldn't shed them. She laughed instead.
I'm paying for this place, she said, or I will. I'm starting real work. High time I earn my keep, I say. You'll see.
Good for you, Sam said, and let her go. And he probably did see the dampness of her eyes and had the common sense not to fuss over it. It was a rare morning. The bash and clatter of hollow forms and the whine of cutters was hundreds of workers and bots keeping busy keeping Sam's promises. She made her own promises as they walked back to the exit and the runabout. That by summer and move-in, she was going to be in a position to take care of Sam. Pay for it, indeed. Her whole life paid for it. Just watch, she said to Yanni in absentia. Just watch. The first Ari developed most of what we do, what every lab in the wide universe does. I'm starting where she finished. I've run through the teaching tapes in 3 months. Everything but this last couple of weeks was basic, and I'm into her notes, and I'm doing integrations. I'll be working on gammas soon. Alpha sets before New Year's. Strassenberg population sets by next year. I'll be able. I'll know what I'm doing, Yanni. And that's not empty bragging. That's the truth. Book 2, Section 1, Chapter 3. May 10, 2424. 1328 hours. Information, encouragingly abundant, in Florian's opinion, had begun flowing along new channels. The new security team and the domestic staff were finally due to arrive for duty in Wing 1. The security team was ready as of now, since Regenesis had finished their documentation, but they weren't setting foot in Wing 1, and neither were the domestics, until Justin and Grant finished their report, which they said would take longer than they thought. And there'd been a problem. Justin was waiting on getting general manuals from library, indefinitely postponed, as they found out, because Justin's inquiry had triggered security alerts, and Justin hadn't been aware that lower Regenesis levels were investigating his request and stalling it purposefully until the probe had gotten high enough in the Regenesis system, namely Hicks's office, to contact Sarah's office, as the ones with their finger on Justin. That was a mistake on their own part, as Florian saw it. They should have foreseen that Justin's inquiry might have raised a flag, considering his connections. Sarah had called Yanni, Yanni had called Hicks, and Hicks had sent out an order to free those items up, so they'd finally gotten to Justin. Days late, but 10 minutes after Sarah had found it out. Catelyn had requested a few more rounds of tape study on protocols for the security group to keep them busy until Justin could do his work. The new domestic staff, meanwhile, had finished their preparation and passed Sarah's final scrutiny, and they might be brought in once their manuals cleared. Much simpler than the Regenesis lot, so, given Justin's prior problems with clearance, Florian called up Hicks's office and made his own personal request, firmly, which got other manuals liberated, to him, at least, who couldn't read them, and who had no permission on file to have them. He took them personally to Justin's office, solving one more bottleneck, and stacking more work on Justin and Grant, who were working extra hours and taking computer time running interface studies among Sarah's staff. Most household staffs didn't get that degree of lookover, but Sarah's wasn't the sort that could ever discharge a member and have them easily plugged in elsewhere. There was too much special knowledge. There were too many security issues. So they delayed that too, and by now Justin and Grant were running short of sleep. But today their own promised Regenesis authorization clearances had come through, an apparently earnest demonstration of Hicks's goodwill, a pass alleged to give them access to anything in Regenesis files, inside Regenesis itself, and to ride Regenesis access through any door in the outside world. Well, any door Regenesis itself could pass. Any door? They tested their new access, just running through local files, not using Base 1, but a system-free set of computers they used for handling any outside contact. They could display the second system content on the same set of screens as Base 1, they could keyboard to the alternate system from the same station, or switch back and forth between operating systems in absolute security. Florian was rather proud of that finesse. He'd done a fair amount of setup, connecting up what would be the new security facility downstairs, so that all of it, the new office and residency as yet unoccupied, and the outpouring of Regenesis version of classified material via their new link, came smoothly into their office via the same secure pipe. A pipe that flowed both ways, but didn't ever breach Base 1's isolation. Everything from those two sources, Regenesis and their own upcoming security office, once it had staff, would dump into the system-free computers in their office, to be carefully gone over before anything touched a Base 1 computer. Base 1 could reach out to it, read only, would compare what Regenesis files contained against what it could find internally, and deliver that daily report, too. There were, on the daily sheet from Regenesis, no current takedown operations anywhere in Regenesis. There was a tolerably serious matter involving stolen meds from a pharmacy. Case solved. They'd argue that one in court. Base 1 had interesting information on that. The pilferer was an employee with previous security issues. That would stop. The list went on, including actionable adultery, minor theft, public nuisance, and other CIT misbehaviors. ASI were rarely involved in any such goings-on, and if they were, the motives tended to be very different. "Quiet day," Catelyn remarked. Real-time access to Regenesis daily logs provided them a window on a level of ordinary misdeed they hadn't hitherto investigated. It was interesting to pick up the pulse of the house. The town itself, down the hill, had its own brand of mischief, the drunken theft of a tractor and the destruction of a piglot fence. A pig-lot fence down in Ag. The individual was charged the repairs. There had been minor pilferage in the food production unit, solved with a reprimand. Far from the focus of their interest. Too much concentration on CIT actions could be, for one thing, stultifying. Things over which an ASI simply had to shake his head in slight puzzlement, never grasping the nature of the fault, except to say it broke rules by which born men in responsible jobs and relationships were supposed to abide. Policing the labs and town was part of the job Regenesis did, generally CIT and ASI pairs doing that, but none of these things affected Ari's safety. and their very access of these items, using Regenesis access, not Base 1, left a trail which might interest Hicks. That was actually desirable, so Hicks would see them using that connection. What was intriguing was not the data, which they could always get via Base 1, but the extent of the data which Hicks afforded them, which was a test of Hicks and his staff, not the data. Rezune's ordinary tenor of domestic life was, in fact, most often quiet. A collection of scientists, administrators, some businessmen, shopkeepers, builders, and service people all observing the law, give or take their personal idiosyncrasies. That was the expected daily event. The largest national upheaval of the afternoon was an ocean storm that had rolled in on Novgorod and taken down 3 coastal precip towers at the river port, surely a bit of excitement to their south. There was redundancy for that situation, and 3 towers lost on a web that size was by no means a crisis, though a regional collapse of the shield was certainly newsworthy. The temporary reliance on backup was delaying flights and river cargo out of Novgorod, and disruption in anything, a barge load of supply orders for Rezune and Big Blue, for instance, could afford an opportunity for dishonest efforts to slip in and do harm. It was nicely organized data. Tabular, it was certainly easier to read than the absolute flood of information Base 1 could deliver in a full spate. Base 1 didn't sort outstandingly well. Cherryh said that sorting, in itself, was a bias, best done in your head if you scanned well. They were aware of that. They did scan well, at a speed nearly up to Cherryh's, but Florian wondered what Regenesis was hiding from its low-level agencies by providing them these nicely organized things to look at. All sorts of things could lie between and behind those neat tables. "They think they'll be shipping again by 1800 hours, Catelyn remarked from her station. 1800 hours, Florian echoed, mildly absent. He was already chasing down another, much more adventurous track on their shiny new authorizations, one that took him into Planis systems. Hicks had noted their interest in the Patil case and had flagged an item for their attention. Florian sent the interesting find, a letter, to Catelyn's screen. Again, something Hicks wanted them to see. Dr. Raymond Thieu was the sender. The recipient was Dr. Sandy Patil. The letter was a week old. This and other items turned up on a simple Base 1 search of the professor's mailbox. Easy to do, and trackless. Regenesis probes left no footprints except in Regenesis itself, and in Base 2, which was Yanni's base. Base 1 left none at all. The Base 1 search had already turned up nothing from Patil to Thieu within the last month. The other 2 letters, also from Thieu to Patil, were not interesting. Apparently a mundane letter which proves Thieu is still writing Patil. This comes from Hicks. Noted, Catelyn said. She hasn't answered any of them. She answered prior letters, but not immediately. It was a chatty letter, advising Dr. Patil to read this article and that in Scientia, offering a little commentary on the dullness of life at Planis, asking about a dues renewal. Dr. Thieu complained he couldn't remember whether or not he had renewed his professional membership in the teaching fraternity, and he asked Patil whether she had gotten the solicitation for membership yet because he didn't want to go through the organization office. Reason unstated. He also asked whether she happened to have the recall number of a book, the title of which he couldn't find on the net. Odd, since the book list was a basic function of the scholarly net. Was that some verbal code, or simply the truth of an old man's suddenly fading memory? And Thieu asked, at the end, whether she had heard from Jordan Warrick. It was probably what had made Hicks flag it to them.
He went back to Rezune. He hasn't written yet. He's probably busy. You ought to call him. You remember Jordan. Tall, brown hair, nice manners.
It went on for 2 more rambling paragraphs about the too spicy restaurant fare in Planis and the need for more variety. Nice manners, Florian quoted wryly. It seems mundane enough. Catelyn said, at first glance. One could wonder if Thieu did provide that card. He complains about losing a library title. Let's see what Regenesis wants to tell us about the rest of his correspondence. Florian searched down the list, flashed 34 files up at once, windowed a few up with a scroll through. Compared that to what Base 1 had. Looks complete. Base 1 had already been through the lot. Base 1 had an interesting little program that could analyze letters for style. If it found stylistic anomalies in what was certainly from the same hand, it could throw a useful spotlight on verbal code. None found, except the new letter. But re the issue of Thieu's mental condition, Florian slipped a quiet, trackless Base 1 inquiry into Planus Medical, and what that pulled up on Thieu indicated Dr. Thieu's rejuve was indeed failing, as Jordan Warrick had described. Failing rejuve and mental lapses. This from Base 1. Maybe the request for the book number is real. He may have entered the wrong title in his search. Catelyn, meanwhile, had done a little Base 1 work on her own, last week. Jordan's Planus records were there. Jordan's Planus records were there, too, sparse on the medical front. And those results now popped to screen 4. Contrast with Jordan Warrick. He seems in excellent health. No self-administered drug use or other complaints. Note the address, Florian said, flagging the item on the medical record. Jordan's physical address was listed as number 18G in Pleiades Residency. And that had just rung a bell against the address from Thieu's medical records. 19G, Pleiades Residency. Next-door neighbors, it seems. Catelyn probed further. Moved was the designation that turned up on screen regarding Jordan's records this week. Jordan's personal files aren't there to the Regenesis probe. This is interesting. Regenesis can't reach them. The Base 1 record didn't have those same holes in it. Note, those files are still there for Base 1, but they're gone to our supposedly highest level Regenesis inquiry. Well, Catelyn said, so either our Regenesis clearance isn't quite as high as it might be, or somebody's blocked those files from them. Yanni could certainly do it. I wonder about Jordan's Minder notes, Florian said. We had those last week. Moved. Base 1 easily found them, a lengthy list of Jordan's goings and comings. And the occasional notes. What am I doing? Moved. Base 1 easily found them, a lengthy list of Jordan's goings and comings and the occasional note about a need for coffee or Paul's notes for Jordan about gym schedules. But Thieu's popped right up, along with all Thieu's bioprints as good as a door key. And Jordan's were still accessible to Base 1, which didn't recognize the fake erasures. Curious, Florian observed. Gone into the same folder as the rest of Jordan's records. Either Hicks isn't being allowed to access it, which would warn him that somebody, notably Yanni, doesn't want him to access those files, or Hicks lied when he said our access would be top level. Oh, this is good. Inside Thieu's Minder notes, did you note this? Lunch with Jordan, the day Jordan left Planus. Jordan broke that appointment because he was in the air. And Jordan detested him? Florian scanned the appointments. Once a week or so, lunch with Jordan, next-door neighbors, or across the hall. Florian called up a schematic of the residency strip in question. Actually opposite each other. Certainly looks like a close association. Jordan knew we could check, Catelyn said, but he lied all the same. He gave that card to Justin. He knew we were watching. And Regenesis, which takes orders from Yanni, can't get to these particular files. Or our new accesses can't. Another lie? Regenesis lying doesn't surprise me too much, Florian said, and Jordan's hard to understand on every level, including, very clearly, doing things he knows we'll notice. He claimed to dislike Thieu, called him a dodderer, and yet has lunch with him regularly. he and Paul. How old is Thieu, actually? Catelyn asked. Florian keyed back to the medicals, convenient hopped on to base 1. 164. Once Rejuve began to lose its effect, it took only a matter of months for a man who looked 40 to start looking his actual age, losing the attributes of youth, acquiring ailments, losing faculties, and 164 was definitely in that territory. If Rejuve is failing him, he'll go fast at that age. I'd think he hasn't doddered long, actually. And Jordan was living there for 20 years, Catelyn said, next door to him, unless there's been a recent change of residence, and a very recent change in Thieu's medical status. Click, 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 from Catelyn's console, Jordan's medical records going back and back to 2404. No, Jordan had that address from the week he arrived. Thieu was there too, from 2398. The information Jordan gave Cherryh is missing some interesting pieces for sure. Now Thieu daughters, and in his latest letter, Thieu jogs Patil's memory about who Jordan is. Rejuve failure, Catelyn said. Maybe Thieu's short-term memory is going. Must be contagious. Forgetfulness seems to have infected Patil, too. She claims no connection with Jordan at all. Yet Thieu, whose memory is going, thinks she'd remember him. I wonder what we could find in her letter files. Worth noting. Those records, except what Yanni might have, lay outside Regenesis' system. Base 1 could try to crack University system. Base 1 could try to crack University's system, but it's not guaranteed to leave no traces, Florian said. We probably shouldn't try it. We can take what Yanni's got, and his files on Thieu. If Thieu's dying, whether or not Thieu has all his faculties, that might stir somebody to make a move, whatever's going on. Thieu couldn't possibly have anticipated Jordan leaving Planet, Catelyn said. Jordan didn't expect security to pull him and Paul out of their office and put them on the plane. Florian ran further through medical records. Thieu's doctor records cognitive function definitely suffering, short-term memory markedly impaired. Long-term recall can be intact for a time. So back to his giving Jordan the card. Did he have enough faculties left for that? Maybe. Maybe Jordan had it without his knowing. Jordan had access in his apartment. The one thing that didn't happen was Thieu knowing Jordan was being released and giving him the card as something to do once he got out, because he didn't know Jordan was leaving. As you say, he couldn't know. That intention was in Cherryh's mind, but not in any record. The current letter, Catelyn said. Thieu wants Patil to look up Jordan. He's trying to get them together. Whatever the state of his mind, that's apparently somewhere on his agenda for some reason. And what is Jordan besides a special in educational site design? Very friendly with people in Citizens, in Defense, and people with ties to the abolitionists. We don't know that he knew the nature of the abolitionist connection, Catelyn said. He was certainly tapped into the network that moves people and items for the dissidents, some 20 years ago. It doesn't say he's trying to establish such connections again. He can't call outside anyway. He was barred from mail to anybody but Justin. He still is. Justin can make a call for him, but Justin didn't. And a restaurant wasn't the place to pass on something Jordan didn't want us to investigate. He was asking for attention. A card is a stupid way to keep an address. It's just good for passing it on. If Thieu gave Jordan that card and wanted him to call Patil, Jordan could have just memorized the address and phone number, then simply tossed the card into recycling. He didn't do it in Planet. He didn't do it here. He either slipped it through a security search, or, more likely in that regard, he actually acquired it, or produced it, here. And then, Florian said, he handed that particular card to Justin on a night when he was absolutely certain to be watched. There's certainly a lot here that doesn't make sense. CITs don't make sense. But this one is a real puzzle. A moment of silence. Then Catelyn said, It's still tempting to think he got the card from Thieu. We're assuming that, because of Thieu's association with Patil. Thieu didn't need to give him the card. It doesn't make sense, except the fact that Thieu has been talking about this Dr. Patil for years. Maybe there's been a long-term effort on both sides of the Tethys Sea to get those two together, for whatever reason. It opens up a lot of possibilities. It does. The old connections, Florian said, re-established. He was a friend of Thieu's.
That there was a connection to Patil at Planus doesn't mean there isn't a connection to Thieu or Patil here in Rezu. These are born men. They have that social dimension. Knowing people who know people, those connections matter, don't they? Florian swung his chair around. The card itself can tell us, with luck. I'm betting Rezunsek has already run the check on the card's chip. Let's see what they found. He hit keys in quick succession, macros for their clearances, and a search into Rezunsek files. Analysis of the problematic card itself was in. It did include its microscopic markers, a very nice precaution from Gerard's time as head of Rezunsek, which indicated that the office supplies used in the card indeed belonged to Planus Labs. Entirely reasonable for Rezunsek to assume it was printed in Planus, Florian said. Planus markers. Physically reasonable to assume it, but anyone with Planus cardstock could print it, here or there. An e-card, never manifest as paper, was the common way for CITs to trade addresses, often arriving as an attachment to a SIG line available for print, available to be shot straight into address files if one trusted the sender. And for office use, it was common to print a card out physically off the signature line of a letter, including even its chip load, if the computer in question had the chip write feature. Careful offices tended to prefer physical cards for introductions and follow-up, but they wouldn't routinely slide a card from some random visitor into their systems. Some cards had proved to carry more than ROM. Some could be quite malicious, a little matter some offices in the world had discovered the hard way. Content, however, was disappointing. It was Patil's academic vita on the card, nothing special. Her bibliography, nothing untoward in surface appearance. Check of the bibliography against her actual record in file in Yanni's office produced no variances. Still possible, he said, that Jordan could have brought cardstock and paper from Planus. Cardstock wouldn't necessarily be viewed as contraband. Catelyn clicked keys. Jordan's file. List of what they did find in his luggage. That went to Florian's second screen. Paper goods, Florian read, so we can officially wonder what that encompasses. Or, back to the original assumption, Catelyn said. Thieu gave it to him and Jordan just walked through customs. Sandwiched it with a stack of blank cards. It wouldn't show on a quick and dirty scan. But again, he couldn't have printed it here. But again, he could have printed it here himself, if he could find a printer that wasn't microtagged. He doesn't have access to one. If it came from Planus, Jordan took real pains to get it up here and put it in our hands. Yanni said that Thieu was upset with the reactivation of the terraforming project. He'd been an activist scientist in his day. So was Jordan. That gives Jordan a motive. Political. Jordan's old alliance with centrists. His tendency to play both sides of the game. His anger against Cherryh. He swung back to the second screen. So what else did security find on him in the search? Personal notes? Reproed and already returned to him. Dense. Scientific. Those had flashed to one screen, at least the initial page, which was overwritten with Jordan's hand notes. There was computer storage. That was huge, encompassing Paul's personal manual specifically, with all its files internal to the computer, nothing reliant on library. Jordan hadn't had library access to other manuals, just that one. Someone must have given him the entire thing, subfolders and all. There were image files. There were more notes, in the peculiar shorthand of design. Not beyond Cherryh to decipher. We could ask her if it's significant. Or if there's anything embedded in it. I'm sure Hicks has had to refer the notes to experts. I'm sure Paul's manual would be significant, if Cherryh could find time to look at it. Jordan and Paul's computers were returned within the week. His notes came with it. His books. He was complaining 2 months ago about access to his own past publications. We know the files he's gotten at since he got clearance. Cherryh might recognize something in that list that we couldn't. Interesting thought, Florian said. Just a second. He called up that list and ran a filter. It took a moment. Well, Catlin said, every one of those publications has Ari Sr.'s articles, as well as some they co-wrote. Not too surprising, since they worked together. Interesting, though. Topics. More keys. Integrations. Nothing at all to do with Patil. Nothing to do with Patil at all. Integrations was the subject of his quarrel with Justin, and integrations isn't in his field. Justin's working in that field. He had a quarrel with that, and with the first Ari's style. Could he have picked the fight as part of a diversion? Florian asked, possibly preparing Justin or Grant for some intervention? Catlin frowned. That would be somewhat beyond us, certainly outside the question of the card. Except that Justin became the target of it after they had a fight about the first Ari's procedures. I don't see a connection unless he's aiming at something and wants to divert Justin into some scheme of his own. Maybe he really does hate Thieu, or wants to sabotage Patil just for spite. Or for profit. Profit would be a reason. Catlin said. A recontact with old networks, former alliances. That has politics in it. That's more like what the records say of Jordan Warrick. An action, not a gesture, something designed to do exactly what it was doing, getting Patil delayed in her move to Fargon. Possible. And someone, probably Base 2 in Yanni's hands, was hiding Jordan's records from Hicks. Or Hicks was hiding them from Sarah. Well, Florian said, and flicked up the General Regenesis Planus office reports on Jordan Warrick. One statistic leapt out. Jordan received 2,814 security cautions during his tenure at Planus. Persistent note on his file. Immune. Do not interrogate. That's been the problem all along with him. Yanni doesn't want him in the public eye again. Regenesis doesn't want the first Ari's murder opened up again. That was what was going on when Dennis went down. We've got the content of the card chip. Nothing overt there. If it's not a verbal code, and still no absolute assurance where the card itself was made. But they can go after where it's been, testing to destruction if they do. But I think it was made for exactly what it was used for. An introduction, dropped right in front of us. From whom? Catlin asked. To whom? Let's see what Regenesis admits it knows about Patil. Regenesis' top-level surveillance of Patil came up easily, creditably meticulous, and ongoing, in Novgorod, within the university where she taught. Her contacts, including letters... Oh my god, I skipped another line. Her contacts, back inside Regenesis files, were all neatly mapped, including letters, some 63 in number, to her old mentor Thieu, and 118 from Thieu to Patil, 52 of them in the last half-year. None to Jordan, Catlin said. None from Jordan. As should be. Several from Yanni to Patil. Patil's house sale is pending. Regenesis buying it. This week. Yanni's order. He had some reason. That could hurry up a trip to Fargon. Meanwhile, the list of Patil's other possible primary and secondary contacts stretched on and on, listed and identified by Regenesis agents in the Regenesis files. Every class of person, from senators and councilors to teaching assistants, radicals, vid personalities, her real estate agent, and the home repair technician who'd recently fixed her refrigerator. She'd made numerous net calls on the local Fargon site, investigating housing, amenities, facilities, reasonable in someone contemplating a move there. She'd made a few tries at getting into the restricted Fargon Regenesis site, on a long lag to Cytine Station, which held that site and others available in its months-ago state. Data arrived at the speed of ships that picked up the electronic load at Cytine Station via their black boxes, and delivered that load to somewhere else, and on to Fargon. In a sense, if you sent a message that entered Cytine Station, it eventually reached every civilized star, and was everywhere at once, until deleted as absolutely irrelevant to the locale where it had ended up. There was no such thing as complete privacy on interstation mail by the nature of black boxes,
and that also went for net data, restricted or not. It got everywhere unless it had a gate restriction that didn't let it flow to any ships but, say, military, or to no ships at all. A lot of CITs weren't aware of that fact of life, or, being aware, so profoundly took it for granted that they didn't worry about it. Patil's request for information was certainly widespread by now, so if she'd intended any secrecy, that was blown. Meticulous, vexatious police work filled other pages, agents patiently tracing out the threads of contact and delving into Patil's household garbage, a list of items intended to be recycled and diverted, some of it interesting in the list items, including unopened physical mail. Regenesis' investigation seemed thorough. It was a fat correspondence folder. The woman didn't open mail that arrived from unknowns. Her system routed it to delete, which deleted a lot of files, or appeared to delete them. Regenesis had gotten at the mail source and been into that, with a resultant long list of would-be contacts, some of which were red-flagged. Lots of Paxer contact, lots of complete unknowns. Oh, lots of Paxer contact, lot of complete unknowns, Florian observed. She'd be a fool to send messages of any interesting sort to anyone. Catelyn said. She deletes their messages, evidently knows who to delete. Some of them are on the watch list. Her mailings out to Planus Labs were all electronic. One mailing was, by title, Rethinking the Theory of Long-Period Nanistic Self-Direction, the censored Scientia article, sent with indignation to Thieu, who had been her teacher. Thieu had replied that it was brilliant. She had written back, decrying entrenched war years thinking and Luddism. The commenting agent had flagged that word and supplied a definition. It meant people who were against progress based on a political movement of 1811 and some years after, against the introduction of weaving machines in pre-space England. Okay, so that had less to do with being against progress and more that a whole lot of people were about to lose all their livelihoods and were somewhat resistant to that because, as ever, look at NAFTA, among other things. As ever, it's like, oh, well, business wants to become more efficient. That's great and fine and dandy. But you've got all these people working there, and eliminating that portion of the workforce, what are they now going to do? And the solution historically has been, fuck them, basically. I remember very vividly when NAFTA was getting both proposed and put into the books, that all these workers that weren't, that were going to be have their jobs outsourced, well, they'd all get retrained, in stuff that was relevant. And I'd be interested to meet even one person where that was actually true for. I've never met one. Where were we? Patil has a large vocabulary, Florian said wryly. Clearly. Why weaving machines? Catelyn wanted to know. But the remark in context seemed metaphorical, not literal. I have no idea, Florian muttered. He was already tracing other things, successfully pulling up Regenesis files on the ongoing investigation of Jordan's Planus apartment, and the people Regenesis had sent into Planus were clearly better than the airport security team Haste. Oh, I see what it's saying. My brain. He was already tracing other things, successfully pulling up Regenesis files on the ongoing investigation of Jordan's Planus apartment, and the people Regenesis had sent into Planus were clearly better than the airport security team Haste had trusted with the outbound search. Jordan hadn't gotten to go back to his apartment once he'd been notified he was returning to Regenesis. Agents had packed for him. While Jordan and Paul, caught in their office, had perversely or purposely brought paper goods, either to camouflage something, or simply because, being a person for whom hand notes and writing were a habit, Jordan had wanted materials he hadn't been sure he'd get easily if he returned to house arrest in Regenesis. It might have been innocent. It seemed Jordan Warrick rarely had been innocent, not by that Planis Regenesis record. One thing he knew. Syrah's security wouldn't have let Jordan fly without a body scan, let alone turning out his pockets. The staff at Planis' airport had searched him for foodstuffs and biological contraband, their usual worry in flights originating from Planis, but nothing more. Because, for security reasons, they hadn't been in on the investigation Regenesis was making of Jordan's apartment, and had no idea at all what they were looking for. That was a major slip, but Syrah's orders had been unexpected, and speed had mattered. Not even Regenesis at Planis Airport had known why Jordan was being put on a plane, but people were about to die in Regenesis, and had already died in Novgorod. It had been just a confused few hours. The agents at Regenesis Airport had naturally confiscated and copied his notes when he landed, but let blank paper pass without, likely paging through a personal use handful. The agents at Regenesis Airport had naturally confiscated and copied his notes when he landed, but let blank paper pass without, likely paging through a personal use handful of blank sheets. Florian made a mental note of his own, that airport security needed more attention to detail once Cherryh took up Regenesis. And it still boiled down to one question. How had Jordan known about the Patil appointment in Novgorod, in security so tight Base 1 hadn't penetrated it? That took the old-fashioned sneaker net approach. Someone had hand-carried either the card or actual information about the Patil appointment. Either would do. So, they could certainly politely ask Jordan about the card and see if he'd cooperate, but they weren't to that point yet, and clearly there was no use asking a special any question to which they didn't already know the answer. So Patil's condo had found a buyer in Yanni's office, with a possession date on July 20. Whether or not Patil knew that was how it had sold. She was currently saying goodbye to the university in a round of parties attended mostly by academics. One such was scheduled this evening. She had sold most of her furnishings, given other items away to friends and charity, was actively arranging storage for all her non-data possessions that she planned to keep, perhaps to ship later. She had no known sexual attachments, no children, no relatives. She was a scholarly woman with a lot of electronic files, preparing to make a long, state-sponsored and fairly high-mass move to a new life, accompanied by those data files and a fair number of household goods, plus, being a CIT, likely a few items of emotional attachment. "She's teaching 2 classes currently," Catlin reported, "besides lab courses, and she is maintaining her schedule. I checked other professors. They have more classes. Patil spends a lot of time writing, and some doing correspondence with the military labs out at Beta, which we can't penetrate. No change of pattern there. She does guest lectures, attends bioethics conferences. The people she's contacting on Site Teen," Florian murmured, scanning that list, and the commentary Regenesis provided. "Old acquaintances, former students, but not many. The majority may be on Beta, in Beta labs. Security block there." "I'm not going to try to crack that," Florian said. "Not worth it to go after those. Yet." He kept reading. Here's a few names on a home system, people Regenesis notes for further investigation." He ran a who is on the Thieu at Regenesis level. Well. How long have we been at this? 2.5 hours. Well, nothing totally new in this. We have some footnotes here from Regenesis, but no mischief attaches directly to Patil, except her lectures attract radicals. "Coffee," Florian said, and got up and poured a cup from the dispenser. A glance at Catlin drew a nod, and he poured another, then looked at the clock himself. Close to time for shift change. "I'm going to message Marco and West to lie in for another couple of hours. I think we should look through Science Bureau records. Base 1 can probably get into those." "Suits me," Catlin said. "Try it.
Shall I have Yanni send us sandwiches? I could use one, Florian said, and settled back at his console, pulled out the under-counter return that kept coffee off the main desk, and set his cup there. Catelyn did whatever she was doing. He worked delicately, probed this, probed that, scanned text without storing it, and didn't get a base 1 warning of any unadvertised connections on Yanni's access, no strings attached. The files had some background of interest. Defense had apparently had a lot to do with Patil's career. Black budget funding had been behind the terraforming labs when they were on Cytine, specifically at a lab just a little outside Novgorod, a lab later razed in favor of a food production facility. Behind closed council doors, there'd been an intense battle over removal of the nanistics lab out to Beta during the war. Centrists campaigned to keep it at least as close as Cytine Station, not relegated to the outer system inside a defense installation. The First Ari had supported the nanistics move to Beta, however, in agreement with Defense, and Centrists had opposed her and Defense at that time in a rare configuration of political alliances. Patil, at 105 years of age, had gone out to Beta when Thieu moved down to Cytine, had subsequently distinguished herself in ways deeply classified, and then Patil herself had been moved back to Central System and on to Cytine as a safety measure during the darkest days of the war. Patil, Thieu, and a researcher named Ibsen, Pauline Ibsen, since deceased, age 136, had all been sent down to Cytine, 3 people who had been working on the blackest of black projects. Most likely the production of terraforming nanistics, but theoretically only. Any lab work was done out at Beta, as a potential and never used weapon of war. After the war, Patil hadn't gotten promoted back out to Beta. Articulate, sharp, and gregarious, so the report said, she had, quote, fallen into the social milieu of the university, unquote, and had found herself a comfortable post and a prosperous side income as a favorite speaker at centrist and pro-terraforming conferences and meetings. Clearly, her imminent departure into Razun's employment had stirred up the centrist community. Some comments had hit the general web, the one that any CIT could access. Some centrists were pleased at the acceptance of what they called a moderating influence into a Razun post. Others were more concerned about losing Dr. Patil's moderate and respectable voice in Novgorod politics once she shipped to Fargon, and wondered if it was a means of silencing her voice. None of the reports apparently knew about her relationship to the Eversnow project. Moderate and reasonable, they call her, Florian said, having condensed the flow for Catelyn. A peacekeeper. Which might argue that Yanni's move to send Patil to Fargon really isn't the best idea, losing her local influence. The Paxers come to her lectures. She doesn't appear to support their activities. Moderation might have been what recommended her to Yanni, however, Catelyn said, and they read a while longer. Then Catelyn said, read the post under Gulag. Interesting word. They were down to CIT political gossip on the Novgorod City net. Florian looked that word up before investigating the site Catelyn had tossed him. The Gulag writer was passionately angry, convinced Patil's transfer was a ticket to a Razun-run oblivion and possible assassination. Well, there might be a grain of truth, not likely in the second. And there seemed, according to the Razun Sec note, another conspiracy theory circulating, quoting a Bureau of Defense argument in committee that it was a move by Razun to gut the Beta Station lab. One supporter of that viewpoint maintained Patil was still doing defense work, and could not legally be transferred from a public university into a Razun-run lab. It's not actually the law that she can't be transferred, Catelyn commented. They just make it sound illegal. She's a scientist. Science posts come from science, even if her post is classified by defense. She just has a job offer from science, and if she accepts it, defense can't claim there's a war reason because the War Powers Act has lapsed. Catelyn was very much better on law than he was. But law wasn't the name of the game. Politics. Politics is all, Both sides aren't likely pressuring her for loyalty, but she votes in science because that's what she is, doesn't she? Check what profession she actually votes in. A few key taps, Science Bureau records. Her voter bleep skilly doo doo doo. Oy. I am struggling. Her voter registration is definitely science, so she's not registered military anymore, not since 2406. Defense still runs the lab at Beta. And if she went back out there, she'd properly, yes it is properly, it's a line break, so there's a hyphen there, and I have to double check. Defense still runs the lab at Beta, and if she went back out there, she'd properly be voting in Defense again. But if she goes to Fargon and works in the new Razun setup, then Defense hasn't got any complaint. She can't claim she knows military secrets, none current at least, no more than Thieu. So the Gulag writer is wrong in his suppositions. And she wants to go to Fargon. Otherwise, she could easily get legal help from Defense and get transferred to them. Which she's not doing. So she does accept going to Fargon, and so do Defense's upper echelons, because they agreed with Yanni. And that will be this Eversnow project when it starts, and it's likely to be very soon. Why did she accept Yanni's offer? Florian asked. Why is she agreeing to jump ship to Razun? Why was one of his favorite questions, best when asked when things seemed neat and wrapped up. And it seemed to fit here. Understandable if someone didn't want to be returned to Beta, which was remote and secretive and full of regulations. Fargon was a comfortable station. Not the comforts of Cytine Station, to be sure, but very much better than Beta. There was that. Eversnow, on the other hand, was a frontier, as barren as Big Blue. A bare steel and prefab station. No luxuries. Novgorod's the height of comfort. She's respected. She has an important job. She doesn't work hard. She's very well paid. She has very many associates who respect her. Why choose to leave? Catelyn frowned. It was close on CIT territory, asking the unanswerable, the emotionally founded question posing as born man logic with far too little knowledge of the individual. Either going for to something or from something. To Razun's new lab. Or from Novgorod. Could there be something in Fargon she wants? Or could there be something in Novgorod she'd like to be away from? The work at Eversnow might attract her. Or Novgorod might not be as good for her as it seems. She has the Paxes here. They won't be there. Some of these people at her lectures are politically intense fringe elements. I've got the background summation on people attending. Long, long list. He flashed it over to her. Some of these people have third-degree contacts under intense watch, indirect links to persons undergoing mind wipe in the hotel bombing that tried to kill us. Politics, Catelyn said. Politics, Florian said, and tagged the whole area for rereading and absorption. I'm going to tape this bit, considering how it connects to Yanni and considering Sarah's plans, which don't wholly agree with Yanni. It still doesn't answer the timing of that card. Give me the tape, Catelyn said. That's a good find. Not the opinion, the names. For deep study, that is. Things they needed to absorb completely, names they needed to know and deep associate with Paxer activity, and with Sandy Patil, so they never forgot them. It was a luxury he and Catelyn had never enjoyed before, to sit atop a pyramid of data with skilled people doing exactly what they were contracted to do, people tapped into all of Razunsec and going over reports from all that organization did on Cytine and elsewhere. The Razunsec access didn't lead them to new things, but it organized things in a way different from Base 1, and that gave them a window into Razunsec thinking. First, it seemed to lead them further and further afield from the item they'd started chasing, Jordan Warrick and the infamous card. And then it seemed to lead back again, to Yanni's office, and Jordan Warrick, and Patil. We need to filter this other, too, Florian said. The net opinions. Not good to deep study it.
Deep study diminished critical thinking. This was opinion. A lot of opinion from untrustworthy people. They just needed the names from the Novgorod CIT net and the suspicions attached to them. "I don't know where we're going to get the time to do this," Catelyn said. "Sarah wants to begin prep for moving." It wasn't convenient, the timing of their complete relocation. Their new staff was delayed. But there was worry on the other side, too, that Sarah would be less safe if they delayed getting her into a more fortified residence. "No good complaining," Florian said. "We just have to do this." Patil's data was still flying under his fingers. "We need to understand it. All our lives we'll need to. These are the enemy. This is where it starts. The people that may be against Sarah now are the people that will be against Sarah all her life. And for now, we just watch Base 2 very carefully." And that is where we will call it for today. I got to run. It also gets us conveniently to Book 3, which is the rest of the book, I believe. Let's find a tentative spot. That's probably good. Where'd my bookmark go? No! It's hiding from me. Found it. Alrighty. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Hopefully people enjoyed. Hopefully I wasn't slurring my words so much. I feel like I'm floating, and not in a good way. Very foggy today. Not outside, in my brain parts. My brain elements. Anyway, schedule for this week will be tomorrow and then probably Friday. Probably. Yeah, that's it. Nothing salient further. We'll be on for tomorrow. See you all later. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Toodaloo!